Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Masks Off. I'm Kim.
And I'm Tia.
And we are so happy to be here with you today. We're going to have a great, deep discussion, I think. I think it'll be pretty deep. We've been really talking about some themes about wholeness and disconnection and how that all relates to authenticity and how that relates to our Masks Off podcast. But before we do dive in, let me start with our quote. So today's quote is from Gabor Mate, and both Tia more than I, but are doing some studying under Gabor. I'm doing an online and you're doing a really big deep dive that you can share more if you want. But anyway, his quote is, for those of you who don't know about Gabor Mate, he's the guy for trauma. If you want to learn anything about trauma, he's the guy.
Addictions, health.
Trauma, addictions, all of that. He has an amazing, amazing story. So his quote is, trauma means a disconnection from self. We become disconnected from ourselves because it becomes too painful to be ourselves. And that is just so true. And I just want to say too, first, trauma means a disconnection from self. Normally, when we hear the word trauma, we don't think about that being the definition.
Right.
We think about, and Gabor talks about it too, we think about like the big things like sexual abuse, being in a war, a car accident, a near-death experience, child abuse, something big and major, right?
And often in an event.
An event. We think about it as being an event. And he says, interestingly enough, the event can be traumatic, but it's not the event that causes the trauma. I'm just going to check my phone. I just realized
And with an event too, someone can have a horribly traumatic, and two people can experience the exact same traumatic event.
Yes.
And some people integrate, process, move through that traumatic event and don't end up with long-term trauma. And other people experience it and have long-term trauma that shows up later in life with this disconnection from self.
Yes.
So while a trauma can be an event, what it really is the result and the co-creation per se after that event, or it's ongoing little tiny moments, but we can't pinpoint a critical event. But it's just those little moments over your life where it's like, here it is again, here it is again, here it is again. And we disconnect in order to survive.
So he talks about childhood a lot in his movie, The Wisdom of Trauma. And again, I haven't read all his books. Like, I think you have read his books and some of his other coursework, but he does talk about how this whole disconnecting from self often, or most of the time, begins in childhood and we talk about it a lot in our podcasts that when we were children, and again, this is not to blame our caregivers at all, because he also says that trauma is multigenerational. So our caregivers went through the same thing from their caregivers and so on and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were children, when we had big feelings about anything, and if we weren't allowed to have those big feelings, or we were told to shut it down or be quiet or don't be sad or don't this, that we didn't have the nurturing that we needed as a child to know that it was okay.
Right. We didn't have that enlightened witness to sit there and hold that space. We talk about holding space is huge.
Yes.
And that means we need to be able to sit with our own pain so we can hold the other. So when you as a child don't have someone there that you can express your feelings, allow them to be seen, heard, and move through and have the co-regulation.
Yeah.
We disconnect from those feelings because we don't know how to handle them. So the nervous system has a response. And then
absolutely
it stays stuck, right? Because we haven't released the after effects, the feelings, whatever the experience, that we're overloaded. We don't have the brain capacity. We don't have the skills. We don't have it. And most adults don't either.
I know. I certainly didn't as a parent. I know for sure. And I will be honest and say that I know that I shut my kids down, and I know that I didn't hold space for their big feelings because their feelings were too big for me, because I still was being that little girl inside of me.
Exactly.
And I think I shared once, and I don't, if I didn't, or if I did, I apologize for telling the same story again. And this wasn't the only time that it happened, but one that I can remember in particular. I was around 7 or 8 years old, and I lived in a 2-family household where, this I know I said before, my parents and my sister and I, we lived upstairs. My grandmother and my 3 cousins lived downstairs. And so the up and down were attached by a back staircase where I could just go down the stairs and be in my grandmother's place. And so my cousins were, if I was 7 or 8, they were like 18, 19, and 20. So they were older, and my grandmother was living there, and they would fight a lot. There would be a lot of fighting, and my mother would go down and fight and argue, and there would be this screaming and raging and uncontrolled of emotions and anger and rage. And it scared me. I can remember sitting on the stairs, just crying my head off, like, stop, please stop, like, stop. They were just having a fight, and I come from an Italian family, and, Italians are known for being very emotional and expressive and,
loud voices
and screaming. So they were just having a fight. You know what I mean? They didn't know how to manage or regulate. They didn't know how to regulate their own emotions. They were very dysregulated. Therefore, I was dysregulated. And that's something Gabor and many other teachers talk about, is how we didn't learn how to regulate our emotions. We didn't have the caregivers that knew how to help us, thus the trauma. Right. And so if you're not able to regulate, and I couldn't regulate, and that was my whole childhood, then naturally, as I became an adult and still didn't have the wisdom, still didn't have anyone to teach me that when I had my own kids, here's that generational pattern. I'm going to not be able to hold space for my kids either.
So when you were sitting on those stairs, listening to them fighting, and this is kind of going a little deeper into it, you were on those stairs hearing it. You wanted them to stop. You were alone on the stairs.
I was
listening. Your body was taking in all that energy, taking in the anger. You were in an activated state. Very. Whether you wanted to flee the situation or you wanted to fight, or, just the classic fight or flight type of stuff. Fawn. I mean, there's lots of F's.
Yes.
But then after that experience, did anyone come check on you?
Never. Mm-mm.
And that's the trauma.
That's the trauma.
That's the trauma. Because if you had felt like you could have gone and talked to your mom or your grandma, and they could have helped you process what experienced, it wouldn't have bled over into other things in your life.
We never did. Everything was pushed under the rug. And I think
they had checked in on you, right?
Or checked in.
Basically just had a connection after the after the event. And, okay, let's work through this. What's coming up for you? I'm here for you. You don't even have to have words some of the times, but you had
maybe even just a hug
process.
A hug. I'm sorry you had to experience that, just
Who
a hug
knows
or
what you needed,
something along those lines. But what I needed, I didn't get. And so there was a disconnection after those events took place, there was a disconnection. And again, not to blame my mom, not to blame my grandmother, because it happened for them as well when they were kids, right? This is just being passed on from one generation to another. And so there was a disconnection between myself and my mom or my grandmother. Any adult could have come to me and said any one of the things you just suggested. So then my pain was too big to bear. Like I talked before about feeling like I was in that abyss of pain. So then what did I do? I disconnected from myself.
Right.
I disconnected from my body because it was too much
And then
to
what
bear.
did you go into? What's the mask that you started to create?
I mean, well, first of all, numbing, like I can remember then that's with the food. Like I would go and eat the ice cream or the cookies, but I also became the perfecter, the people pleaser, the peacemaker,
Right. So
big
you
time
started
peacemaker.
to fawn,
Yes.
right? And you started to disconnect even more because you had these feelings, but if you showed them, you were afraid of
Right.
what could or couldn't happen because they wouldn't go wondering what's underneath that
Right.
that's coming up. So you pushed it down, disconnected, and was the peacemaker.
Yeah.
The people pleaser to try to keep things calm, because when things weren't calm and there was conflict, it just reactivated
Yep.
that original wound, because it likely happened before you were 7. That's just the
I know.
memory you have attached right now. But that was not new for you at 7
It
years
wasn't.
old.
No.
So to survive, you severed from that emotional feeling within you as you needed to.
I know.
Right? But again, like you said, it's now that pattern just got recreated in your generation. And then it showed up when your kids were little, until you started transforming and realizing this pattern and going within and actually feeling what it felt like to be that little girl on the steps. And then you could reparent yourself and transform that pain, see her, give her what she needed when she was 7 and other ages. So now when that feeling rises up within you, if you start to notice that now, right, because it never fully goes away. It's just you start to integrate and play the dance with it, I guess. So now what happens what do you do now?
Well, so it doesn't fully go away, but it becomes less and less. So like what happens now is, so I still get triggered if I see people arguing. So like if my son and my daughter are going at each other back and forth, and it's like an argument, or I still get that initial charge of like, oh my God kind of thing. But then I have the awareness of, okay, I can now regulate myself by, if it's just a few, simple affirmations to myself or reassuring words. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. But I also am like in that moment that it's happening is when I go ahead and I address it or attend to it and hold space for it, rather than like go eat. And sometimes that'll happen. That's fine too, because if I don't hold space in the moment and I go to food or some other distracting
some other
behavior,
old coping mechanism.
If I go back to the old coping mechanism, it'll come back around. The universe will show me again, time and time again.
Exactly.
And I will say though, each time it happens, it's less and less.
Right.
I'm more aware in the moment, and the feeling that I have is shorter. That charge is less intense, and it doesn't stay with me as long because I know what to do now. I have the tools.
And that's the beauty, right? It's recognizing it's here. And you have these tools, the wisdom, the practice, right? Because it's come with lots and lots of practice and self-compassion.
Yeah.
And so when that little girl rises up in you, you also know it's not about what's happening in front of you right now.
Right. It's not.
It's you being on those stairs, sitting there.
Right.
That feeling.
That's what is.
That's the dance of how do we stay in the present and take care of our little self from the past.
I totally agree. Yeah, it totally is. So I love that. And just like another example to just go along with what you said about about that is what Gabor shares in his movie about, I don't know if you remember the example, how he was at the airport and his wife was supposed to come and pick him up. Or she just said, "Oh, do you want?" Not even there. And so what he felt, I'm so sorry. What he felt was that the abandonment that he felt when he was a baby, because his mother, it was like during Holocaust time, and his mom ended up having to give him to a stranger for 6 weeks to save him.
Literally.
Nonetheless, literally, but nonetheless, it felt like it was an abandonment for him. So when his wife didn't come and meet him at the airport, he got very angry and very frustrated, but he knew that after, processing it, and again, it's about a process, that it had nothing to do with his wife not being there. She was an artist. She was just in the flow of creating art. It just lost track of time. It is what it is. And what he was really feeling was something from when he was abandoned as a baby.
And what I love about that example, if you ever hear him tell that story, is he's been doing this work a long time, right?
I know.
And the story that he shared, he did not, or was not in that little self. It took him quite a while.
Yeah, it did.
To process and deconstruct, and his wife helped him through that as well. And so that's also the beauty with this work, is sometimes, and actually more often than not, to do this work alone, we can't fully understand everything, just because we need someone to hold a mirror and remind us and point out those spots that we may not be able to see. So his wife helped him in that process and allowed him the space until she's like, okay, you've had enough time.
You had enough. Yes.
It's time to address the elephant in the room, which is your trauma. I mean, she didn't say it that way, but it shows the beauty so there's so many layers with that, is that he's been doing this. It didn't just happen like you shared, in the moment, which can happen at times, but there's times it just takes over.
It does.
And so honoring where you are doesn't mean you don't have bigger events like that. And the beauty of having community for healing and
absolutely
transformation and integration. And sometimes we just get activated because we're out of balance and other things, and something that may a week ago not have been so large feeling because of the work, but in a week or two, it may create a bigger response in us just because of where we're at, and having that compassion for the journey and the experience.
When you have that compassion, or you take that time to go inward and deconstruct and to nourish that little child inside of you, all of that is now reconnecting to yourself, right? Because if we go full circle into the quote, trauma means a disconnection from self. We become disconnected from ourselves because it becomes too painful to be ourselves. But when we have the self-compassion, when we allow the space to be exactly the way we are, with the pain, with the feelings, even if I'm reaching out to you and asking you to hold space for me, that is still a reconnection to myself, because I'm valuing that pain enough to say, Tia, can you help me out? Beautiful. I'm having a really hard time. I want to deconstruct this pain. I want to work with it. That is a reconnection to myself, where we can then work our way back into the wholeness of who we are.
I love that. And I love that too, because it's showing also and demonstrating that reconnecting to ourselves also means taking action steps. And if that action step is saying, hey, friend, I need you to just help me sit and process and hold space for me as I work through this, because without reconnection, action steps aren't towards reintegrating and recognizing our wholeness. And so there's so many layers, and that's such a beautiful reminder that asking for what we need also is a reconnection to ourselves, because so many of us don't feel we can ask for what we need or receive as well. So it's not us standing on a little isolated island. Healing happens in connection as well.
We're all on this journey together,
right? Because we can mirror back. Like if you can't see your whole right now because you're in pain, I can still see you as whole and provide that mirror for you to help you remember. And you do the same for me. And so, because we get disconnected from self, and someone helps us. Hey, I see that you're whole. Remember?
Yeah.
Remember.
You're just forgetting right now. you're forgetting that you're wholeness.
Exactly.
So that's a beautiful way of bringing this episode to a close. And we can, as we say all the time to our listeners, if you are needing support and you need, us to help mirror to you, feel free to reach out. You can reach out, on Facebook. You can message us. There's a number of ways you can get in touch with us.
Yeah. Yeah. And we, like Kim said, we have things that are available right now, and we're in the works developing something else. It's a little ways out, but we'll be excited to share that with everyone when the time comes. But we definitely want to be here to support everyone on their journey, because as we just said, doing it alone is hard work, and we can't always hold that space for ourselves fully every time.
Yes, 100%. So thank you, everybody. If you enjoyed what you heard today, we would love for you to leave us a comment, or you could subscribe, like. We would love and appreciate that. Definitely. So have a great and wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.